Hurry it up, you bastards. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around. Ricky Ray Rector. January 1992, Ricky Ray made a special request for a luxurious meal and dessert. However, after he finished eating, he set aside that dessert and informed the officers there who came to take him to the chamber that he wanted to save it for later. So, who was Ricky Rector, and how did he end up with such a disturbed state of mind? March 21st, 1981, Rector and some friends drove to a dance hall in Conway, Arkansas. When Rector's friend was denied entry for not being able to pay the $3 cover charge, Rector became enraged, pulling out a .38 caliber from his waistband and fired several shots, wounding two and killing a third man named Arthur Criswell. After leaving the murder scene, Rector used his friend's car to wander around the city for 3 days, finding shelter in the woods or even staying with relatives. March 24th, Rector's sister managed to convince him to turn himself in. He would agree to surrender, but only to Officer Robert Martin, whom he'd known since he was a child. Martin arrived at Rector's mom's home shortly after 3 p.m. and chatted with his mom and sister. Rector arrived shortly after and greeted Martin. While Martin was distracted, Rector quickly pulled out a gun from his back and shot him twice. Rector then turned around and walked out of the house. Once he walked out of his mother's house, he put the gun to his own temple and fired. He was quickly discovered by other police officers and taken to the local hospital, but that shot had destroyed Rector's frontal lobe. So he would make it through surgery and was put on trial for the murders of Criswell and Martin. His defense attorneys argued that Rector was intellectually impaired and not competent to stand trial. However, after hearing conflicting testimony from several experts who had evaluated him, it was ruled out that he was competent to stand trial, and he was convicted on both counts and sentenced to death. January 24th, 1992, Rector was executed by lethal injection. For his last meal, he requested and received a steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and pecan pie. After he finished, he left the pie on the side of the tray, saying that he was saving it for later. But that later never came, and the slice of pecan was not disposed of until Rector had been executed. Thomas J. Grasso. 1995, just before his execution, Thomas here was upset because his final request wasn't fulfilled to his liking, and he made sure to let everyone know about it. November 23, 1962, Thomas Grasso was born in West Babylon, New York. Before he was born, his older brother, Joseph Grasso, tragically died when a neighbor accidentally ran him over with a car. Thomas was supposed to be named after his late brother, but his mom decided to make it Thomas Joseph because a psychic had warned her that naming him Joseph would bring bad luck. Despite the name change, Grasso's life was filled with turmoil, eventually leading him to the execution chamber. December 24, 1990, Grasso strangled 87-year-old Hilda Johnson with her own Christmas tree lights in her Tulsa home before robbing her. Just 6 months later, he would murder 81-year-old Leslie Holtz from Staten Island after stealing his Social Security check. New York detectives investigating Holtz's murder arrested Grasso shortly after the murder, and he confessed to both murders within 2 weeks. September 28, 1992, Grasso was sentenced to death in Oklahoma. March 20th, 1995, he made his way from his cell to the execution chamber, and as he was getting strapped to the gurney, he glanced at the reporters and said, I didn't get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this.
You see, for his last meal, he requested SpaghettiOs, 4 dozen steamed mussels and clams, a Burger King double cheeseburger, a half dozen barbecued spare ribs, and 2 strawberry milkshakes. But the one thing he really wanted, SpaghettiOs, wasn't what he received, much to his disappointment. Victor Feger. Picture yourself, you've just been found guilty of murder and are facing the death penalty. Before you meet your fate, you have a last meal. What do you choose? A lavish feast, perhaps? Victor here took a really different approach, requesting a single olive with the pit still inside. 1960, Robert Feger, a Michigan native, arrived in Dubuque, Iowa, and rented a room in a rundown boarding house. Shortly after his arrival, Feger started calling doctors from the local Yellow Pages in alphabetical order, claiming a woman needed medical help. Eventually, he got to Dr. Edward Bartles. When this doctor arrived, Feger kidnapped and killed him in Illinois, leaving his body in a cornfield with a gunshot wound to the head. A few days later, Feger was caught in Birmingham, Alabama, while trying to sell Bartle's car to James B. Alford, who felt suspicious and alerted the FBI. Because Feger transported his hostage across state lines, federal charges were filed against him. He tried to blame a drug addict from Chicago for the murder, but authorities found no evidence of that. This man was eventually convicted in federal court and sentenced to death. March 15, 1963, Feger was executed by hanging. For his last meal, he requested a single olive with the pit still in it, and he told the guards he'd hoped an olive tree would sprout out from his grave as a sign of peace. Feger may have been content with his simple last meal, but the next person on this list definitely wasn't. James Edward Smith.
1990, for his last meal, James Edward Smith would make a request so bizarre that the officials turned it down and gave him unflavored yogurt instead. So what happened, and what did Smith do to end up on death row? March 7th, 1983, Smith, a tarot card dealer, walked up to the teller's window at the Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston, Texas. But this was no ordinary day. Smith was wearing a stocking mask, armed himself with a gun, opened the glass window and pointed at the teller, demanding that she gave him all the money. When she refused and sought shelter behind a filing cabinet, he shifted his attention to Larry Don Rojas, the 44-year-old district manager of that company who had been standing next to her. Rojas complied with his demands and retrieved the money from the cash drawer, which was then handed over in a plastic bag. But as Rojas walked away, Smith ordered him to return to the window. Rojas begged Smith not to shoot him, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Smith pulled that trigger twice, and the second shot struck Rojas's chest, killing him. Smith quickly ran out of that building and was pursued by two employees on foot. They ran through a field and then into an apartment complex where Smith opened fire on his pursuers. But as he was trying to leave the complex, he tripped over on the street and was caught by the people chasing him. The police arrived shortly after and took him into custody. Smith was later found guilty of capital murder and was sentenced to death by a Harris County jury. May 11, 1988, was originally scheduled for his execution day, and the prison put everything into motion, and he was asked what he wanted for his last meal. But his answer shocked everyone. Smith requested a last meal of Riacunda dirt. Now, the request was obviously denied by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and instead Smith would receive a pot of plain yogurt, which was actually on the approved foods list. Carl Panzram wanted to die, but he had a different attitude. He cursed his executors, making a final wish for them to hurry up, because he was getting impatient with them trying to end his life. June 28, 1891. Carl here was born in Minnesota to parents who had immigrated from East Prussia. Now, his father abandoned the family when he was just a little boy, and when he was 12, Panzram committed his first burglary and ended up at Minnesota State Training School, where the staff treated him horribly, with beatings, assaults, and torture. He was let go from the school during his teens and wasted no time running away from home. Panzram would move from place to place by hopping train cars. He would rob innocent people he came across during his travels, which eventually landed him in more trouble with the law. By 1908, he was sent to the U.S. disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, and when asked about his experience at the correctional facility, he said,
"I was a pretty rotten egg before I went there, but when I left there, all the good that may have been in me had been kicked and beaten out of me."
Once released, Panzram returned to his habits and progressively became a more violent criminal, as he physically and sexually assaulted many of his robbery victims. June 24, 1915. Panzram got caught again, receiving a 7-year sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary. In his first year at jail, Panzram helped a fellow inmate, Otto Hooker, break out. While on the run, Hooker killed the prison warden, which made Panzram an accessory to the crime, his first time being connected to a murder. They gave him extra time, but Panzram chose not to stick around the prison either. By 1918, he broke out and embarked on a horrific murder spree along the East Coast. A decade later, Panzram was eventually arrested again for stealing and was sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. But this wouldn't be the only crime he would be punished for while he was there. He later claimed to have committed 21 murders, more than 1,000 acts of sodomy, and thousands of robberies and arsons. But he was far from remorseful. To use his own words,
For all these things, I'm not in the least bit sorry.
When he first got into prison, he told the warden that he'd kill the first man who bothered him, and that's exactly what he did. A few months into that term, Panzram brutally murdered the laundry foreman by beating him with an iron bar. It would be for this crime that Carl Panzram was sentenced to death. Now, this might have been a dream come true for someone like Carl, as he once put it.
I look forward to a seat in the electric chair or dance at the end of the rope, just like some folks do for their wedding night.
When human rights activists tried to interfere on his behalf and stop his execution, he scorned them and told them he wished he could kill them all. September 5th, 1930, Carl Panzram was finally hanged as he had desired. At the time of his death, he was 39, and almost no one was sad to see him go. So eager to die, Panzram's last statements was,
Hurry it up, you bastards. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around.